Hey, welcome back to Drowning in Yarn. I'm Caleb. A few weeks ago, I asked you all for some suggestions for videos you'd like to see, and one of my favorite suggestions that I got was a video about what to do with those single skeins of yarn that we all have in our stash. So I figured I'd reach out to all of you over on Instagram and here on YouTube and see if you had any suggestions for me. I also spent some time over on Ravelry, and I put together a list of really amazing patterns that all can be made with your average 100 grams of yarn of varying weights. So if you'd like to see what you can do with those single skeins of yarn that you have in your stash, then don't go anywhere. Before I jump into the list, I just want to remind you to hit that little like button down below if you're watching this video and you're enjoying it. And if you like entertaining, inspiring, and informative videos about knitting and yarn, then hit the little subscribe button and the bell next to it to get notifications when I post new videos in the future. Also, let me know in the comments down below if you want to make one of these patterns or if you think of something else that you think we should all look at. Doing all these things, hitting that like button, hitting the subscribe button, and leaving comments all help my channel to grow and help grow this community so that we can all share information and learn from each other. So jumping into the list, I am considering a single skein of yarn to be 100 grams of a given weight. So think the average amount of yards that would come in a skein of that weight of yarn. For worsted, for instance, that's around 200 to 220 yards. So each of these patterns can be made with 100 grams of your average yarn. I have so many skeins of fingering weight yarn in my stash that are single skeins. So in whatever color it is, I only have the one. Sometimes that works really great, but sometimes I don't want to mix and match. So I just want to find a pattern that will work great with just that one skein of yarn. I love knitting shawls, so I'm going to kick it off with some shawls. The fact that these designers took a single skein of yarn and made a whole shawl is mind-blowing. First, I have the Melodia shawl by Janina Kallio, and then I also have the Venezia shawl by Joji Locatelli. These two patterns are so beautiful because they're taking that one skein of yarn and stretching it into an entire shawl. It's going to be a little bit on the lighter, thinner side, but it's still going to be a perfect accessory for fall or spring or even the winter whenever you wrap it all the way around and the fabric gets real cozy and thick. The Melodia shawl takes about 437 yards of fingering weight yarn, and the Venezia uses about 400. I really like the elongated, kind of unique shape of the Venezia shawl, and it has really beautiful lace detailing around the edges. And the Melodia shawl is your more typical shawl shape, just a little bit of a shallower depth because it is just one skein of yarn. But I really love the eyelets in it, and garter stitch is just so relaxing to knit. I'm definitely going to go searching through all my fingering weight skeins to find one to turn into a Melodia shawl because I think this is a shape that I could totally rock and would love to wear in the fall and in the winter. But if you're not feeling like knitting a shawl with your single skein of fingering weight yarn, then check out the Musselburgh hat by Isolde Teague. This is a super interesting hat because you're basically knitting a long tube, so it's going to be great for those knit nights or taking it on the go. And then it's closed up on the ends with really beautiful 4-point shaping, and then it folds in on itself to create this double thick, cozy, warm fabric. This pattern actually can be knit at a multitude of gauges. I think there are 6 gauges in total. I'm considering it a single skein project for fingering weight because it uses about 400 yards, which is going to work with 100 yards of most fingering weight yarns. But consider those other gauges as a bonus. So if you buy this pattern, it's going to work with a lot of different yarn, but you can definitely make one with one skein of fingering weight yarn. So moving up one yarn weight, let's talk about sport weight. I know it's not as common, at least in my stash. I only have a couple skeins of sport weight yarn, but those skeins of sport weight that I just have the one. So I thought I'd include these two beautiful cabled projects. The first one is the Lamplight hat by Sarah Solomon. It's got these really beautiful cables and a double thick brim. So it's going to be super cozy and thick around your ears and warm in the winter, but it has a little bit of slouch, so it's got some extra room in there. I think these cables would be really fun to knit. So if you love knitting cables, then you want to check this one out. Also check out the Traveling Cables Fingerless Mitts by Pearl Soho. This pattern only uses up to 250 yards of sport weight yarn. Fingerless mitts are kind of quick to knit and they work really great in multiple seasons if you're in a warmer winter or through the fall, so I really like them as an option. Next, let's talk about DK weight yarn, which is going to be a little bit thicker than sport weight but still a little bit thinner than worsted weight. I really like DK weight yarn, but because you're starting to get a little bit thicker on the yarn, in that same 100 grams you're going to have a little bit of a shorter amount of yardage. So the first pattern blew my mind when I saw it because Janina Kallio of Woolenberry was able to take one skein of DK weight yarn, only 225 yards and knit an entire shawl. The shawl is called the Orbit Shawl, and it's so cute. So if you have just one skein of DK weight yarn and you want to make something that's super impactful, this Orbit Shawl is a great choice. Because it only takes 225 yards, it's going to knit up so quickly, so it could be a great quick gift, or it could be an amazing accessory to knit for yourself. But again, if you don't want to knit a shawl, then I have a hat for you. This hat is called Violet Waffles by Haldora J, and it's actually a free pattern over on Ravelry. It only uses about 164 yards of DK weight yarn. I love the texture on this. It reminds me of those thermal undershirts, so it's got that kind of wintry warm look to it, and I think it'd be a great accessory that would go with anything. It's got a really classic look. So the final DK weight pattern that I have to show you are Moonstone Mitts by Nicole Bracey. I've had this pattern in my queue for a long time, and I think this year is going to be the year that I finally make them. The pattern on the back of these mittens is so beautiful and unique. I love how it has these geometric shapes, and it looks so impressive, but I don't think it would be super difficult to pull off. So this is going to be a great use of about 225 yards of really any DK weight yarn that you have. So grab whatever you've got and make these really beautiful mittens, and people are going to think that you are putting in so much effort when really you just knit a really relaxing, easy project. And if you've been watching this channel for a while, then you know that those are my favorite kind of projects. I love projects that don't take a ton of effort but have a really big impact, and I think these mittens fit that bill. So those are all the DK weight patterns that I have to tell you about. So let's talk about worsted weight patterns. Worsted weight yarn, I think, is one of the more commonly purchased yarns, at least at your big box craft stores. So I know that we all have worsted weight yarns in our stash. I think it's a little bit more difficult to find those single skein projects for worsted weight yarns that aren't just hats, just because the yarn is a little bit thicker. So you're going to get kind of a shorter amount of yardage, but you can make really beautiful hats, and I have a really gorgeous cowl for you as well. So the first hat that I want to show you, and I hope I'm saying this right, is called the Spruce Grouse hat. The Spruce Grouse hat by Katie Harrod of Songbird Handmade has a really beautiful kind of thick, textured, chunky chevron that goes around it, and it comes with instructions for a single layered brim or a double thick brim if you want to make sure that you keep those ears extra warm, and it only uses about 140 yards of yarn on the higher end. So the next worsted weight hat pattern that I have for you is called Jason's Cashmere, and it's by Melissa Thompson. This beautiful cabled hat only uses about 200 yards of worsted weight yarn, and I think it would be a really relaxing cable knit for a more experienced cable knitter, or a great project to practice cabling if you're an inexperienced cable knitter, or as a first cabled project if you're a new cable knitter. Because it only takes 200 yards of yarn, you're not going to invest a lot into it if you're not sure that it's going to come out the way that you want, and it's a free pattern. So pick this one up and try those cables out if you've never done it before. And if you want some tips on how I make working with charts a little bit easier, which will be super useful for a lot of the patterns on this list, then check out my video with tips on how I make knitting from charts a little bit easier to track and a little bit less stressful. So the last worsted weight pattern I have for you is the Free For All Cowl by Jen Peck. This pattern takes 100 grams of worsted weight yarn and makes a beautiful textured cowl. It's so impressive that one skein of worsted weight makes this accessory. I love the texture and the chevrons that run around the circumference of the cowl, and the eyelets that give it just a little bit of extra interest. You're only going to need about 225 yards of yarn to make this, so you're definitely going to want to check this one out if you want to keep your neck warm. One skein of yarn is not going to make a whole scarf, but it can definitely make a cowl, and cowls are a great winter accessory. So finally, I have one project for those knitters who like to work with a super bulky yarn, and because super bulky yarns tend to have really short amounts of yardage per skein, this one's for kids. It is the Traveling Cable Hat from Pearl Soho. It's a free pattern. It's knit in Pearl Soho super soft merino yarn. I love all of Pearl Soho's yarns that I've tried, so if you can, you should grab that yarn and give it a try. But if you have a skein of Lion Brand Thick and Quick in your stash, which I know most of us probably do, I know I have a few, then you could definitely use that. This hat only takes about 87 yards, and it would be an even better first cable knit than Jason's Cashmere, because those chunky cables are going to fly by in a flash, and it's going to make you feel so ready to take on those more intricate cable knits, or it's going to be a completely effortless cable knit for somebody who's knit cables before. But if you don't want to knit a child's hat, then you can definitely check out the same hat with the same cabling pattern that's on the Traveling Cable Kids hat that's in the super bulky and the Traveling Cable Mitts, and make a worsted worsted weight hat for yourself. The worsted weight pattern is also free and uses about 218 yards of yarn. Again, definitely check out Pearl Soho's yarns, and for all of these patterns, check out your local yarn store if you don't have a skein of yarn sitting in your stash waiting to be turned into one of these. But I'll also leave some links down below for some really great affordable choices from knit picks that you can pick up to knit any of these patterns. All of the knit picks links are affiliate links, and clicking on the affiliate links really helps me grow my channel and helps me out because I do get a small commission whenever you purchase from those links, but it doesn't cost you anything extra. So thank you so much for using my affiliate links. But those are all the patterns that I have for you today. If you've thought of a single skein pattern that you love to knit or has worked out for you in the past, drop a comment down below and let us all know, and tell me which of these patterns spoke to you and you want to make. While you're searching through your stash finding the perfect skein of yarn, I'm gonna go search through mine and find a great fingering weight skein of yarn that I can use to make the Melodious shawl. Before I go, I just want to remind you to hit that little like button if you enjoyed this video, hit the subscribe button and the bell next to it if you want to see more knitting and yarn related videos coming up in the future. But until next time, I hope you enjoy your knitting and I will see you later.